You know that feeling that some people seem to have one foot here and the other somewhere beyond, in a place we can't quite see, but somehow know is real. That's what Carlo Acutis was like. From the time he was little, he had this connection with God that left everyone around him speechless. And it wasn't just religion in the usual sense. It was as if he could see farther than our eyes ever could, as if he had a direct line to the divine. He talked to Jesus the way you'd talk to your best friend on WhatsApp, natural, spontaneous, without all the formality that sometimes makes faith feel distant or out of reach. And living alongside someone like that makes you question everything. It makes you wonder, could I have that kind of closeness with the sacred too? Is there a level of spirituality I just haven't discovered yet? Carlo's spirituality wasn't dull or heavy. It felt light, even pleasant. He'd smile when he talked about prayer, the same way someone might chat about yesterday's football game or the last movie they watched. And that lightness spread to everyone around him. It helped us see that faith doesn't have to be a burden on your shoulders. It can be the opposite, a pair of wings that lift you. What struck me most was the way Carlo spoke about the gospel. He wasn't the kind of Christian who overwhelms you with Bible verses or judges you for every little slip. No, he lived Christ's message so genuinely that he didn't need to preach much at all. His own life was the most powerful sermon anyone could give. When you were near him, you felt that faith wasn't a list of dull rules, but an exciting adventure, a true love story with the creator of the universe. He had this rare ability to make the sacred feel accessible, close, real. He wasn't some unreachable saint in a stained glass window. He was a flesh and blood kid who had discovered something most of us spend a lifetime searching for, that God isn't far away, waiting for us to show up perfectly polished. He's right here, right now, wanting to walk with us through the chaos and beauty of everyday life. And Carlo understood that so deeply that every gesture, every word, every smile carried the bright certainty. There's something I'll never forget, something that still sends a chill through me when I think about it. Carlo's dreams. They weren't the usual messy dreams we all have, the kind that mix pieces of your day with something absurd. His dreams were different. They were vivid, real, heavy with meaning, like direct warnings from heaven. Not the crazy dreams you get after late-night pizza or a scary movie. These felt like genuine revelations, as though God himself was giving Carlo a private devotional while the rest of the world slept without noticing a thing. One time, and this is burned into my memory, Carlo woke up completely pale, his eyes wide, hardly breathing. He ran to me, still trembling, and told me he'd had a terrible dream. He saw the Basilica of Assisi collapsing, stones falling, dust rising, total chaos. Honestly, I let out a nervous laugh. I thought it was just his imagination, maybe something he'd seen in a history book or a documentary. I told him to calm down, that everything was fine, that it was only a dream. But a few days later, the news broke everywhere. An earthquake had hit the region of Umbria in Italy, and part of the tower of the Basilica of Assisi had actually fallen. I froze. Completely. A cold shock ran through me. How can a 15-year-old dream something so specific and see it happen days later? How do you explain that with logic? There is no rational explanation. Carlo wasn't surprised when he heard the news. In fact, it was as if he had expected it. He just murmured quietly, with that serene calm that defined him, "The Lord showed me, so I could pray for the victims and for those who care for that sacred place." And in that moment, I realized something profound. How many times does God try to speak to us and we simply don't hear him? How many signs slip by unnoticed because we're buried in Instagram, Netflix, work, worries, all the noise of daily life? Carlo is always tuned in, always connected, as if he had a spiritual antenna perfectly aligned. It was like he had a radar that picked up frequencies no one else could hear. And it didn't stop there, because with Carlo, it never stopped. He had visions of his grandfather, who had passed away years earlier. One night, after a long time spent in prayer and adoration, Carlo came to me with tears in his eyes and told me he had seen his grandfather. not in an ordinary dream, but in a clear, vivid vision. He said he saw his grandfather in purgatory, suffering, needing spiritual help, calling out for prayers. And what did Carlo do? Without hesitation, without a second thought, he offered his own suffering, his own trials, his own sacrifices for his grandfather's soul. 15 years old. Just 15. Most Christian teenagers that age are focused on likes on their photos, on their school crush, on the next weekend party, on what they're going to wear. And none of that is wrong, it's normal. It's part of being young. But Carlo, without stopping being a kid or enjoying life, had reached a level of spiritual maturity many adults never touch. He was interceding for the dead, offering his life as a bridge between heaven and earth, quietly acting as a priest within his own family. When he finally became sick, and his illness was no small thing, it was a fast and devastating leukemia, he didn't react the way you'd expect a teenager to react. There were no cries of, "Why me?" No anger toward God, no paralyzing despair. Carlo looked at his mother with those deep eyes of his, eyes that seemed to see past the veil of this physical world, and he said with a peace that didn't feel earthly at all, "I want to offer my illness, every bit of this suffering, every moment of pain, so I can go straight to heaven without passing through purgatory." Imagine the spiritual strength it takes to say something like that when your own body is being destroyed from within. There was no rebellion, no bargaining with God, no, "If you heal me, I promise." None of that. He simply turned his pain into a bridge, his illness into an offering, his suffering into a kind of heavenly currency. And that peace he carried, the quiet light in his eyes even in the worst moments when the nausea was unbearable and his body was shutting down, was living proof that he wasn't alone in that battle. It felt as though invisible angels stood around him all the time, forming a protective circle of light, whispering praise and comfort into his ears, reminding him that his mission was almost complete. The doctors and nurses who cared for him would say they had never seen a patient so serene, so at peace with his own destiny. They'd walk into his room and feel something different, an atmosphere they couldn't quite explain. Living beside Carlo in those final days was living inside the deepest mystery of the Christian faith, and at the same time, living with the clearest certainty that something infinitely greater exists, far beyond what our limited minds can imagine. It was like watching heaven and earth touch, like seeing eternity step into time, like understanding that death isn't the end at all, but only the beginning of real life. And all of that didn't come from a pretty sermon. It came from watching it embodied in a 15-year-old boy who chose to live every second with his eyes fixed on Christ. Carlo believed deeply that the real battle each person faces isn't against physical illness, financial troubles, or the everyday hardships that wear us down. Those things are real, yes, but they're only surface symptoms. The true battle, the one that really matters, is against spiritual indifference, against a soul that's fallen asleep, against the numbness that modern life quietly spreads through us day after day until we stop feeling, stop questioning, stop searching for what's sacred. Carlo spoke about angels the way you might talk about the weather. He spoke about saints as if they were close friends. And he spoke, calmly and without drama, about the forces that wander around distracted souls, those darker energies that feed on our pride, our carelessness, our materialism. But he never spoke about these things with fear-mongering or theatrics. He spoke with serenity because he knew, without a shred of doubt, that goodness is infinitely stronger than evil. For him, good and evil weren't abstract ideas that live only on Bible pages or in dense theological books. They were real forces at work in the world, and every person, every day, makes choices that draw them toward one or the other. And Carlo, intentionally and consciously, chose the good every single day. Every morning was a new choice, a new act of surrender. The astonishing part was that he didn't make that choice out of obligation or fear or religious duty. It came naturally to him, as effortlessly as breathing. It was simply part of who he was. It wasn't a mask he put on when he walked into church and took off when he left. It was his true self. And when you asked him, because I asked him many times, trying to understand his secret, where that strength came from, that unwavering consistency, he always answered without hesitation, the Eucharist. He always returned to that. For Carlo, the Eucharist wasn't an empty ritual, not just a Christian tradition repeated, because it has always been done that way. It was a real encounter, a living presence, a heavenly nourishment. He called it the highway to heaven, and that image still moves me. Think about it. While most people search for complicated shortcuts, secret techniques, or mystical formulas to reach God, Carlo had found the highway direct, quick, dependable, and it was there available to anyone, in any church in the world. It was there in front of the tabernacle, in those quiet moments of adoration, that Carlo felt truly at home. While other teenagers searched desperately for their place in social circles, in endless parties, in empty relationships, or in the virtual world of social media, Carlo had found his place in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And that certainty radiated from him in such a tangible way that it made you think, maybe I should look for that too. Maybe I've been searching in the wrong places. He spent hours there, simply being, simply adoring, without hurry, without an agenda. In a time when everything has to be fast, productive, measurable, Carlo showed us the value of time, lost in prayer. And believe me, that time was never lost. It was the most valuable investment anyone could make. It was there, in that silence filled with presence, that Carlo recharged his spiritual batteries, found clarity for his choices, and gathered strength for everything life placed before him. He prayed the rosary every day, without fail, with a special love for Our Lady of Fatima, whom he affectionately called my best friend. And look, when Carlo said that, it wasn't some empty poetic line. He meant it literally. To him, Mary really was his best friend, more present, more reliable, more loving than any friend of flesh and blood. It wasn't the rote devotion of some old woman who prays mechanically while her mind wanders. It was true friendship, deep spiritual companionship, real intimacy. Carlo talked to Mary the way you talk to someone who really knows you, who understands your deepest struggles, who's always there when you need her, who never judges but always points you toward what's best. And that taught me something powerful I had never considered before. Authentic Christian faith isn't just following rules written in old books or showing up on Sundays because that's what's expected. It's about building real, living relationships with the unseen. It's having friends in heaven who constantly intercede for you, who watch over you from places we can't see, who walk beside you even when you feel utterly alone. When Carlo got sick with leukemia, the terrible disease that could destroy anyone emotionally, that makes many people lose their faith and turn against God, he never rebelled for a single second. He didn't shout at the sky asking, "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" He didn't fall into despair or let bitterness consume him. On the contrary, he consciously turned pain into an offering, suffering into spiritual fuel. He said, with a conviction that still leaves me speechless, "I offer everything, every nausea, every fever, every moment of weakness, every hour in the hospital for the Pope and for the Church." Can you imagine? A 15-year-old boy dying, his body ravaged by a brutal disease, and his primary concern isn't himself. It's the universal Church. It's Christianity as a whole. It's the Pope, someone he didn't even know personally. That isn't some distant, unreachable sainthood you only see in stained glass and think, "I'll never be like that." That is radical, absolute, unbreakable coherence with what you profess to believe. It's putting your money where your mouth is. It's living what you preach to the very end. And after his death, which happened in the early hours of October 12, 2006, fittingly on the feast of Our Lady of Aparecida, signs began to multiply in ways that even the staunchest skeptics, the most rational minds, and the cynics couldn't easily ignore. It started subtle, almost shy. A child in Brazil dreamed of Carlo even though he'd never heard of him. A young woman in the Philippines felt his presence during a desperate prayer. A Mexican father, on the edge of suicide, saw a photo of Carlo online, and felt something inexplicable that made him step back. Children in different countries across completely different cultures began dreaming of this Italian boy with the calm smile and deep eyes. People with terminal diagnoses inexplicably recovered after asking for his intercession. Those who had abandoned faith entirely, self-proclaimed atheists or agnostics for years, returned to prayer, came back to church, picked up Bible study again, rediscovered prayer. It was as if Carlo, even without a physical body, even dwelling in another dimension, continued his mission with even greater intensity. Among the many striking accounts that circulated, and believe me, there were hundreds, maybe thousands, of testimonies of faith from all over the world, one case gained particular attention and eventually reached the Vatican for official review: the case of Matheus Viana, a child from Campo Grande, Brazil. Matheus suffered from a severe congenital pancreatic malformation called an annular pancreas. It was serious, devastating. The boy vomited constantly, couldn't keep anything down. Every meal was torture. Every attempt to eat ended in vomiting. Matheus was malnourished, extremely frail, his body like that of a much younger child. The parents had taken him to numerous specialists, tried multiple treatments, spent fortunes on consultations and tests. Nothing worked. The situation was desperate, and the doctors were clear. Only an extremely risky surgery might fix the problem, but the chances of serious complications were high. Then, on October 12, 2013, exactly 7 years after Carlo's death, again on the feast of Our Lady of Aparecida, during the first Eucharistic Congress held in Campo Grande, something extraordinary happened. Matheus's mother, Luciana Viana, brought her sick child to the celebration. She had heard about Carlo Acutis, his Eucharistic devotion, the miracle reports. With that mix of faith and desperation only a mother knows, she fervently asked for Carlo's intercession. She carried a small relic of the blessed, a piece of cloth that had touched his body. During the Congress, with tears streaming down her face, Luciana touched Matheus with that relic, praying, begging, handing everything over to God and to the young blessed's intercession. And then, suddenly, without warning and with no medical explanation, Matheus stopped vomiting. Just stopped. After years of constant suffering and endless vomit, the child was calm. He could eat. He could keep food down. His body began to strengthen. Days passed, weeks, months, and he never vomited again. No symptom of the disease returned. The doctors were baffled, completely puzzled. They ran every test possible, reviewed the case 1,000 times, consulted international specialists. They could find no reasonable medical explanation for that sudden, complete recovery. The congenital malformation of the pancreas, something structural, physical, plainly visible in every previous exam, had simply vanished. Or better said, the body had somehow learned to function perfectly in spite of it. In every sense, it was medically inexplicable. The Vatican, which is extremely rigorous and even skeptical when it evaluates miracles because it must be in order to preserve credibility, studied the case for years with medical and theological teams. They examined every detail, every scan, every testimony. And the final verdict, after all that exhaustive investigation, was unanimous: a medically inexplicable cure, a genuine miracle. The miracle of Campo Grande was officially recognized by the Holy See, and with that, the path toward Carlo's beatification and future canonization opened wide. Heaven had spoken, and it had spoken through a Brazilian child who vomited endlessly and suddenly stopped. But the most beautiful and deeply meaningful part of this entire story is what came after the official recognition of the miracle. Because God's miracles never end where we think they do. There are always more layers, more meaning, more divine connections waiting to be discovered. Father Marcello Tenrio, the local priest who followed the whole process closely and witnessed firsthand the spiritual transformation that took place in Campo Grande, was profoundly moved by something he believed was far more than coincidence. He would say, with his eyes lighting up every time he reached this part. The date of the miracle, October 12, cannot be a coincidence. It's too perfect, too symbolic to be accidental. And once you start looking into it, once you begin connecting the dots, it's impossible not to feel a chill run through you. October 12th is the day Carlo Acutis died in 2006. It's the same day, 7 years later, when Matthäus's miracle happened in 2013. It's also the day Carlo's canonization process was officially opened in Milan. And finally, it's the feast day of Our Lady of Aparecida, the patroness of Brazil. 4 monumental events, all tied to the same date, all woven together by an invisible yet unmistakable spiritual thread. Father Marcello would say with a conviction that touched everyone who heard him, Our Lady of Aparecida was the great instrument behind Carlo's canonization. It was no coincidence that this miracle happened here, in Brazil, on her day, on her soil. She wanted this. She arranged this from heaven. Mary wanted the first officially recognized miracle of her young friend Carlo to happen right here, under her protective mantle. And look, when you start seeing these divine synchronicities, these coincidences, too perfect to be coincidences at all, it becomes impossible not to feel that there's an invisible hand stitching everything together with a perfection far beyond human understanding. It isn't blind religious fanaticism, and it isn't seeing things where there are none. It's simply recognizing patterns that go beyond statistical chance, recognizing God's signature in the unfolding of history. It's understanding that spirituality works on levels our limited reason only barely touches. And somehow, in a way that's both mysterious and beautiful, Brazil became the geographical and spiritual epicenter of devotion to Carlo Acutis. As if God had looked upon this vast tropical nation with all its cultural variety and vibrant faith, and had said, "Here, it will be here where my young saint will find his deepest resonance." And that is exactly what happened. As the news of the miracle spread first locally, then nationally, and eventually across the world, something extraordinary began to unfold. More than 99%, let me repeat that so it's clear, 99% of all reports of miracles, answered prayers, inexplicable healings, and profound conversions attributed to Carlo Acutis came from Brazilian soil, not from Italy, his homeland, not from other European countries with centuries of Catholic tradition, from Brazil. This phenomenon baffled even the Vatican investigators. Why Brazil? What is it about this country that forged such a deep connection with this young Italian? Maybe it's the intensity of Brazilian popular faith. Maybe it's the open-hearted way Latin cultures embrace the saints. Maybe it's something we can't fully put into words. But the fact itself is undeniable. Brazil fell in love with Carlo Acutis, and Carlo from heaven seems to have returned that love with an abundance of grace and signs. Christian youth groups began forming all over the country, inspired by this boy who was both so modern and so holy at the same time. Parishes organized Bible studies centered on Carlo's life and teachings. Families rediscovered the value of praying together, the rosary whispered in the living room, Sunday Mass taken seriously once again. It wasn't the result of a well-planned church marketing campaign, and it wasn't the product of some communications strategy crafted at a desk. It was something entirely organic, entirely authentic, driven by real testimonies of faith, ordinary people, sharing how Carlo had changed their lives in very concrete ways. A mother would tell how her rebellious teenage son had returned to church after learning about Carlo's story. A young professional shared how he had rediscovered the Bible and begun attending weekly Eucharistic adoration. A teacher recounted how she had found her way back to faith after years of militant atheism. These were simple stories, without theatrics or exaggeration, yet incredibly powerful because they were true, because they touched the heart, because they revealed real transformations in real lives.